completeness status of each of these policies and programs in the base reuse plan. We coordinated that effort with the jurisdictions. That was part of the scoping report process. We took that through the admin committee, and we received comments on how the reassessment process discussed the current status of the completion of each of these policies and programs, and that went through quite a bit of review last year. Essentially where we ended up is that the reassessment report characterized or described each policy and program as either complete, incomplete, or ongoing. And those were, actually we have a slide for this. Work back a little bit. Well, okay, I think I might have missed it. Sorry. Okay. Here's an excerpt from the reassess, or this is a slightly modified excerpt from the scoping report, and I'm going to get to this in just a minute. We used a version of this for the recent seaside consistency determination for their local coastal program that the board considered last week. But anyway, in essence, each of the programs was analyzed as being either complete, incomplete, or ongoing, and the reassessment report identified and isolated out of that effort and put together into one table a list of all the policies and programs by jurisdiction that were determined to be incomplete, and that is attachment D to your board report today. That's page 40. It starts on page 41 of 56 in your packet. It's broken down by jurisdiction, so City of Marina, City of Seaside, County of Monterey, and FORA. And again, these are just the. This is just a summary of the programs that were determined to be incomplete. In the actual full text of the reassessment report itself, there's additional detail and notes related to each of these, but this is a summary table. And as you can see, there are quite a few programs that were determined to be incomplete. However, to be fair and to be a little more, to go into a little more detail about this, there are, if you were to take it to the next level, there could be considered to be different subcategories within incomplete. Some are incomplete because they have not yet been triggered by other events or development proposals, or by a certain other action having been taken. So some of these are incomplete because they, if you will, are not yet ripe to be acted upon, and some are incomplete because, well, some are in fact due or perhaps overdue for action to be taken. So there are different flavors, if you will, of incomplete. And as part of what we'd like to do, taking it to a next step, we would like to, FORA staff is recommending that the board direct FORA staff and the admin committee to coordinate a work program and a schedule for identifying which of these incomplete policies or yet to be completed policies are due or overdue or not yet ripe for action. And to take it to a next level beyond that is to identify the outlines of a schedule and a timeline for being able to make some progress towards achieving these programs and policies that have not yet been completed from the base reuse plan. So what you're seeing up on the screen right now is just a one-page excerpt from a checklist that we coordinated on with the City of Seaside. And this is just to give you a look and feel, kind of flavor of what would be a work product that we would be developing in the very near future to work on with the admin committee, which is to have a by jurisdiction. For each individual jurisdiction, we are recommending that, well, actually staff would be proposing to develop this checklist of incomplete policies and programs, isolating those, pulling those out of the reassessment report, and sitting down with each jurisdictional staff to basically vet these issues a little more, see if they have any different perspective or insights on what the determination was in the reassessment process, or if things have changed since then, to get some feedback from them on which programs they consider to be ready for action versus not yet being triggered by things that would need to take place in the future before they could be considered timely. And that's an effort that staff is suggesting that we would be working on with the admin committee and jurisdictional staff over the next few months, and returning back before the full board. In the relatively near future, we have targeted July to August as a workable time frame to be able to report back to the board with a status update on that effort, and recognizing, of course, that the base reuse plan is a long-range, long-time horizon document, and there are certain programs that may not be ready to be acted upon until years in the future. So we do view this as being the actual full completion of all programs as a multi-year effort. And just given the difficulties that the jurisdictions are probably facing with their budgets and staffing levels, even establishing a work program we feel is likely to be, or the outline of a work program to establish a schedule for moving forward on completing the programs, just to establish what that would look like in time, is probably going to be a multi-month effort at the least, and that's why we are targeting in the July and August timeframe to be able to report back to you on that. That's the first component of Category 3. There is another component. So the Category 3 assigns responsibilities by jurisdiction, and it also assigns some responsibilities for these programs to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority. The primary one that has been discussed a lot in this in these prior workshops and board meetings, the primary FORA responsibility under the base reuse plan work programs is the development of regional urban design guidelines that would be base-wide and applied to all areas in the base that were identified in the base reuse plan as being appropriate for needing regional urban design guidelines. The first chunk of that effort took place several years ago with the development and the adoption of the Highway 1 Corridor Design Guidelines. That is a completed document, and that's available on our website for review and has been applied in previous consistency determinations. But there's additional work that needs to be done in developing design guidelines for other areas within the former Fort Ord. Back in the latter part of December and through January of this year, FORA staff was working with the admin committee to establish a time frame for making some progress on developing regional urban design guidelines. There's an attachment in your board report today, attachment in your packet. I believe there's attachment F, and that's on page 51. It's just it's the most recent admin committee report going back to January, where we were working with the admin committee to establish a work program for moving forward with the design guidelines. That effort was essentially put on hold back in January in order to let this process move forward and establish some priorities and an outline of what forest staff should be working on coming out of the reassessment process before prioritizing any one particular effort, such as this one. But anyway, to recap, what staff is recommending for this component of Category 3 is to restart that effort with the admin committee in the near future, and to continue to work towards establishing a tentative schedule, outline, and some next steps for making progress on the regional urban design guidelines. And that's it for Category 3.
Very good. So for the two components of Category 3, the first one, of course, looking at completeness, whether various planning efforts are complete, incomplete, or ongoing. Basically, the staff recommendation is to create, we'll use the word work team, with forest staff and the administrative counterparts in the jurisdictions, the administrative committee, and really outline a work program and identifying a schedule and timeline, and a similar kind of step forward in terms of the design guidelines. So basically it's another kind of subcommittee, although it's not a subcommittee of the board. It's a subcommittee, it's a work team, rather, of city and municipal staff and forest staff making progress on this Category 3 area. So let's pause, ask if there are clarifying questions on Category 3, and then we'll pivot to public comment and come back and seek direction on these three categories from the board. Questions on Category 3? Yes, Dave.
I don't really have a question. It's just a comment. I think the direction's good. Obviously, any legal analysis that needs to be done on any of these things, I think we need to really kind of focus on that aspect, given my comments previously. But I do think the direction is good to proceed ahead, restart that process. But I would be legally cautious as you go forward.
Right. So if indeed this legal analysis suggested before the break is launched, be cognizant of how it would apply to this Category 3 work. Jane.
Thank you. I think, getting this into a work group is really critical. I would just comment that some of these things have relevance that to the individual jurisdiction, but then there are several where multiple jurisdictions are supposed to be essentially kind of working together or at least being compatible. So I hope that as you do this, you'll look at, after your first blush through it, identify the ones where you need to identify another work group of, that's multi-jurisdictional to really move those things forward. And I would just say that, in looking through this list, a lot of these things are really basic. Design guidelines, how can we even have gotten this far without having design guidelines? There are, open space plans, long-term maintenance of public parks. How setback requirements for seismic. Really, to even get started with any sort of development, we really need to have these things in place. So I hope that you'll really make it a priority to get these things moving.
Good. So a couple of key points from Jane. One, recognize the multi-jurisdictional nature of some of these issues. It may not just be FORA to one jurisdiction, it could be several. And recognize how fundamental design guidelines or other guidelines are to the whole planning effort. Ian.
And some of these are duplicative, so it seems like it's 163 or whatever, but like Jane just said, some of them are the same. Mm-hmm. Seaside should have a wild oak plan, and Marina should have a wild oak plan.
Right.
But really what I wanted to get to is that hopefully the committee can look at some of them and see how they are not should be eliminated. There's no need for them, because one is, for example, a specific plan for the MBAS Center. That's one of the ones. So as just as important as the ones James mentioned, there's some in here that don't apply. Mm-hmm. And then it's another one that says install interpretive displays within community parks. Right? We're counting that as incomplete. We're getting knocked for that. But interpretive displays mean you have to have the park and then the money for the display, if you bought the picnic benches and everything else. So that looked good when we had all the money coming in and it was going to be a big plan. So maybe we have too many of these programs that are not appropriate, particularly when we talk about cutting back, because some of these are 5 years down the road. When we finally get a park, then we improve the park, and then someone comes up with a plan. So I think we do need to prioritize them and get the ones we really need, and not just say it's 168 that incomplete.
Good. So be eyes wide open about possible duplication. Maybe some of these are obsolete. Maybe they can't be implemented because there are fiscal constraints or other obstacles. So don't just assume it's a game of addition. There might be some subtraction here too. Gail.
Thank you. In the city of Marina, I know that this is something that has been discussed, and at least as a city council member in the city of Marina, I'm urging the city, our city, and our staff is indicating they are trying to schedule time with the FORA staff to address those that apply to my city, and I commend our city staff for doing that. What I am also think that we need to move forward with is some of the most basic, the design guidelines that apply, because I think you are setting those regional guidelines then that cities and other jurisdictions are supposed to be looking at for what we do within our own jurisdictions. My question, and I have no idea, this is Design Principle 6. do we need to, I don't know the process, I need help with this, but this design principle 6 doesn't even mention the national monument. So some of our design principles, the very basic things that you're now showing as what we haven't done, may be challenged by the change of circumstances. Certainly the national monument is a game changer, and so it's here. How do we make these adjustments? Where does that happen in the process is, I guess, what I'm asking.
So think about the relationship between these design guidelines and other major drivers or recent developments like the National Monument. Let's take a comment from Tom and then pivot to public comment.
So the one hard nut I see here are in fact these regional urban design guidelines. And the reason I say that might be a challenging problem is they're supposed to be regional across the base, and yet in some ways that reaches right down and grabs a hold of Marina or Seaside or the county's sovereignty. In addition, you've entitled some developments in those areas which already have design going on. So the question is, how do you come up with a set of design guidelines that to a certain extent recognizes things that might be out of the barn already, that try and bridge the gap between what Seaside might want versus what Marina might want versus what Delray Oaks might want. And I hate to mention another big elephant sort of rolling around in the room, but there's obviously a fairly large, as has sometimes been characterized, environmental community at interest here that would probably want to weigh in on regional urban design guidelines. So if I were to make a suggestion in that regard, it would be to get that going early, and maybe that work team needs to have fairly broad representation, not just the land use jurisdictions themselves, but beyond that, and maybe even, if I'm perhaps suggesting some heretical idea here, some representation somehow from that quote-unquote environmental community. You might as well put them in a room. Maybe you can lock the door for a couple of months and hope you get some good regional urban design guidelines out of that process.
Thank you. Unless a board member has a burning comment, and maybe you do, Ralph,
Yes, I do.
I'm sort of looking at the clock and thinking about your overall agenda. But go ahead.
Well,
Make the last comment before we pivot.
for the most part, I'm in favor of regional efforts. But if we're going to say regional, what is the region? I mean, FORA is a small area. It's not a region. And if we're going to put regional design guidelines, does that include Pacific Grove and Monterey? Does that include Castroville, Salinas? So we got to be careful about the word regional because it implies a larger area. And I don't know if it's really appropriate to overlay architectural and design guidelines over cities. We have our own architectural review boards and planning commissions who have their own ideas, and the cities have their own design guidelines. We do have some sense of guidelines in regards to the Highway 1 corridor, which is very important to all of us. But I really wouldn't be really enthusiastic about any kind of overlay.
Especially if it connotes override. All right, Ian? Yeah.
When we talk about adding special interest groups to the group and locking them in the room, one of our programs that I believe is incomplete is guidelines facilitating the relationship between FORA and the homeless. So when we start talking about special groups and they get a special say, then we need to make sure we include all of them. So, and we had the same relationship with our veterans. So if one group doesn't appreciate what the board comes up with, then they're free to come down here also. But we need to be cautious about getting special sign-off by special
Yes.
groups.
Well said. Very good. Well, at this point, I would ask the board members to think about the direction that staff has sought on these three categories. And I think on category 2 in particular, we need a little more clarity on what that guidance is. But at this point, I want to pivot to public comment, and I would really encourage members of the public, to the extent possible, please comment on potential action on categories 2, 3, and 4 as they've been discussed today. And as you approach the podium, please introduce yourself and your affiliation.
Yvonne Stone, FORA Environmental Justice Network. You know, the FORA board back in 1994, or whenever it was designed, was supposed to implement the community plan, not part of the community plan. And most of the attention, or first attention, was to go to the communities and those people and families who were greatly impacted and who lost their jobs, their housing, and their livelihoods. That was supposed to be first. Instead, we're last. And looking at the black community, that is still the very last one that are supposed to be getting attention. We've been put on, we're 20 years down the road, 20 years, and I don't see any signs of recovery, especially for those people. I have spoken here over and over again about how our community was dwindling, how people are having to leave the area because of the lack of resources, the lack of jobs. And I still don't see the concern that we should have for that. We're talking about forming this committee right now to look at all these categories that have come out of the reassessment. And I attended the reassessment workshops. And I didn't know that what we talked about had to be put into categories so we can figure out what to do next. Most of what is in this packet is about roads, recreation. There's a little blurb in category 4 about recovery of jobs and housing, just a little blurb, one little blurb. Doesn't say anything about economic recovery for the devastated community. I don't see that. And we need to stop dislocating our community and bringing in people and putting them on the front line and keep pushing our communities further back and paying attention to what they're talking about and what they're doing. And there is no cohesiveness here, and there needs to be. We can see who's in the room and why aren't they in the room. The disrespect, the lack of attention to the other members of our community is awesome. I mean, it's awful, just awful. So I encourage you. I encourage everybody. I'm also working with the Homeless Coalition. I'm meeting with the Homeless Coalition. I'm meeting with everybody that I can meet with because the problems are very grave in our community. Now, the people in this room, most of them are not experiencing the problems that we're experiencing.
Time has expired.
Okay, time is expiring, of course. So I got my couple of minutes in. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. So a strong pitch to bring greater attention and concern to impacted communities and bring in particular resources for recovery. Go ahead. And please introduce yourself.
Jane Haynes. The base reuse plan has something called community vision, and its regional guidelines is only one.
Jane, could you lift the mic? Thanks.
Well, yeah, regional guidelines is only one of 6 parts of the community vision. Regional guidelines is one, Highway 68, design guidelines or whatever, is another, and so on and so forth. What went wrong when you did it this before as you piecemealed it and you're getting ready to piecemeal it again? What should happen is the whole community vision thing should be, all 6 parts should be looked at together. That would include landscaping. That's what happened on a Highway 68 thing. That's why you can see all those big box stores without any trees. If you'd done the whole 6 parts of the community vision, you wouldn't have that problem. So you're getting ready to piecemeal this again, and that's not what the base reuse plan says. There's about 20 or 30 pages that just cover design parts, and it says regional urban design guidelines is only one of 6 parts. So I've sent a letter on this. I guess I'll send it again.
Thanks, Jane. So a pitch to watch out for piecemealing. Look at all 6 parts in creating community vision. Go ahead, sir.
Tom Mancini, I just want to pick up on, you know, guys don't normally get compliments lately, but I'll give you one here. About the residential land use policy F1 on the homeless and working with FORA, I want you to remind you that FORA has been instrumental in transferring almost 20 duplexes to the Veterans Transition Center. And so just a reminder that the majority of the homeless properties are in the city of Marina. And you have Interim, Pueblo Del Mar, Shelter Outreach Plus, Homeward Bound, and of course you got the Veterans Transition Center. Olive Abrams and Preston Park are in the city of Marina. And I think that the city of Marina has been working with FORA on this. I'll give you guys a compliment there. There's not much you can do about it. Most of the properties that were vacated have been turned over to the respective agencies. So FORA has been working with the Homeless Coalition over the last, well, when did they get formed? 15, 20 years ago. So I want to say that this might be one of the items where you don't need to address anymore, because all the property is in the hands of the homeless.
Thanks very much. So kudos for progress on transferring property and making progress on the homeless issue. Go ahead.
Margaret Davis. One thing that I would like to propose be added to the list of items that municipalities need to complete is it's my understanding that the deeds to all the properties on former Fort Ord were transferred with covenants, that there are certain items in there that the new owner has to comply with, and that these covenants run with the land, and that many of the deeds were transferred without the covenants having been added. I would think that it would be appropriate to identify each city or the county, identify what items are in these covenants and ensure that they're communicated to the developers.
Good. Identify items listed out in the covenants and communicate those to prospective developers. Any other public comments? Go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Doug Yount, interim city manager, City of Marina. Just want to applaud your efforts relative to the ad hoc committee and forming of the ad hoc committee. I think that's a great idea. I think that will help bring light to information and move things forward. Also want to encourage, if you can, direction to staff and your consultants to prepare. I think would be helpful would be binders for each board member and one for each staff of each agency with all of the category 1 through 3 suggested changes in track change form. So you have one binder with all of that each of you then, either as a board or as a sub-ad hoc committee, can then have a reference document that's easy to go through. Now, of course, you have the base reuse plan reassessment and the base reuse plan itself, but in one document it's track changes. That's just an easy form or tool that could be used then to help in the discussion. Also appreciate the opportunity to meet staff, city staff, particularly at Marina, with FORA staff and the consultants on the Category 3 changes or Category 3 items. We did not have this opportunity, unfortunately, prior to this point and during the reassessment, and it would be very helpful. I think there's a number of items in there that are either already have been completed or routine or are addressed in a number of ways that just may not be known. And then finally, I also applaud the board then for your legal review on Category 2. I think that's a great idea. Anytime you have a legal question, you have a CEQA, land use CEQA attorney that's available to be able to help provide information to the board to make decisions. And one of those areas you may also wish to review in that legal review is the jurisdiction's general plan consistency adoptions of their general plans when they came to the FORA board and were adopted may provide some additional information regarding this process. Thank you.
Thanks. Several points: support for the ad hoc committee, suggestion on creating binders for categories 1 and 3, support for the forest staff work team with city staff on category 3, and support for the legal review. Any other public comments?
Hi, Sid Williams, resident of Marina. I'd just like to say that today has probably been the most useful day you've had so far in trying to do this. And the previous meeting and the board meeting where you tried to do it, we accomplished 0. So I think the idea of subdividing the work down to committee level is a great idea. I think you should have more than one because it's too much for one small group to do. I think you ought to have one that maybe looks at 1 and 2, and one that the admin committee can look at 3, and somebody else can look at 4 and 5. And they ought to go in there and negotiate together and assume that CEQA and legal will be met, because you're going to hire a person that's going to tell you what you have to do about CEQA and legal requirements. And they have to discuss the other sides of the issue and then bring that back to the board. You need to consider when you're doing those kinds of things that have happened in the past and things that may be happening in the near future, and what we did to accomplish a monument and what we might want to do to make sure the cemetery gets built. Thank you.
Thank you. So support for committee level work, maybe even expand the concept, and support for the CEQA legal review. Any other public comments? Let's pivot back to the board. You have an assignment from staff or an ask. They would like guidance on 3 categories. It sounds like there's pretty broad support for the path forward that the chair outlined on category 4. It sounded like there was pretty broad support for the staff suggestion on category 3. Category 2 was a little more complex, and that's where we brought in the idea of the legal/general plan law review. And I think an open question there is, what part of category 2 can move forward concurrently or in advance of that legal review, if any? And I actually asked staff to think about that question. And Darren and Jonathan, do you have a response on that or suggestion?
Just as a suggestion, the items related to the consistency with general plans, in particular the Regional Transportation Plan by TMC and the Monterey Bay Unified Air Pollution Control District Air Quality Plan, as well as encouraging City of Monterey and County of Monterey to submit their general plan for the consistency. Those could go parallel to any process with CEQA review. It's just a proposal.
That's a suggestion. Yes, Ralph.
The suggestion of a binder was a really good suggestion, and I thank you for that. But that might be appropriate for this category as well, with the binders and a summary of what was actually done and why it was done, so that we could just look at it and see what those issues were at the time when that action was taken, and with a before and after look at those maps. Might be really helpful.
Good. Thank you. All right. So, Mr. Chair or other board members, do you have motions or proposals you would like to bring forward in terms of giving direction to staff on any one of these or all 3 of these categories?
Yes, Scott, we won't be doing motions as part of a workshop. We'll bring it back before the next board meeting, per se.
No,
we can have action item direction for...
Yeah, Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I'm prepared to make a multi-leg motion that would at least give staff direction.
Okay.
Go
for it.
And Specific to Category 2, I would move that we direct staff to provide a recommendation to the FORA Exec Committee, which I believe meets on April 3rd. Then they could recommend to the FORA Board, which meets on April 12th, the retention of an outside counsel in regards to CEQA analysis. I don't really see the difference between a CEQA attorney and a land use attorney. You can't be a land use attorney if you don't know CEQA, and you're not going to be a very good CEQA attorney if you don't know land use. But that nuance escapes me. I just simply move that we put that process in place to retain outside counsel. In regards to Category 3, I'd support approval of the staff recommendation to restart the analysis of the incomplete processes, programs, and policies, and making sure that that's consistent with legal consultation during that. The specifics of what those incomplete processes are, what the outcome of that process is going to be isn't before us now. You simply want direction. This provides you direction to go ahead and deal with the issues that were brought up as part of that discussion. And then in regards to Category 4, I'd move that we concur with the chair's recommendation of the formation of the subcommittee as described in personal makeup and as described in scope and mission, and also approve the expenditure of $9,100 for the facilitation necessitated by that process. I believe that there's a post-reassessment facilitator service authorization you need from us today, so that's part of my three-legged motion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Supervisor Potter. Is there a second for the motion?
Second.
Okay, we have a second by Mayor Rubio.
And
Discussion on the motion? Yes.
If I might just, I do support, and I just put it in the motion so we have direction. I think the binder recommendation, the Yount amendment as proposed, is a good idea, and would serve as sort of a historic resource. And as far as the retention of counsel, that scope of work would both be prospective and retrospective. What's happened in decisions in the past and advice on decisions to be made in the future.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, out to the public. Any? Yes. I'm sorry, Gail.
I think you said approve $9,100. It's up to $9,100. It's just to make that clear. And I think that how the subcommittee runs, I think that when I read the staff report here, it's that the FORA staff is meeting with the consultant to decide that. And I think there needs to be greater flexibility that the committee really is involved in how that process would be handled and the use of the consultant with the committee.
And through the chair, I'd agree. I mean, basically, we're approving it in concept, and I would suspect
so I
that.
just want to make sure it's not that.
No, I would want the specifics to come back for further definition. And you're right. The staff report's actually a little inconsistent. At one point, it says it's the chair's authority to appoint, and then it says we need to go ahead and approve. So, I think we've got a ways to go on a lot of the stuff that's before us. But I do think today's discussion has been worthwhile, and I appreciate that. It certainly exceeded the decorum of the previous meeting.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Scott, thank you for an excellent job
Thank
as
you.
Yes. This was out of the order. Okay, in order to ensure that we are doing things by the numbers, does any member of the public wish to make any comment with regard to that motion or second? Any member of the public? Seeing no members of the public, okay, motion stands and the vote stands. Scott, again, thank you very much for your excellent job as an independent facilitator of this workshop. We'll see you for the third workshop for sure. And one comment too, also, one other comment is, I think you all can see the ad hoc committee we have has a lot of work, but the FORA staff, it seems like every 10 minutes was a major mission that we put on the FORA staff, from binders to maps to red line copies to everything else. So they've got a lot of work to do, and that in conjunction with doing these Freedom of Information Act requests which are innumerable and incessant. Thank you very much, FORA staff, for doing all that hard work. You really deserve a lot. We're almost done. Not that we're saving this for last, but public comment on any item that's not on the agenda. Public may comment now. You've got 3 minutes. Please state your name, if you would, for the record. Thank you, sir.
Arthur McLaughlin. I just want to make an announcement that the Fort Ord National Monument first anniversary celebration will be held on May 11th. So mark your calendars and come out.
Thank you, sir. Any other member of the public wish to make any public comment? Seeing none. Okay. Any items from members that would like to
bring
out any items for the rest of the board and the public? Seeing none.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen of the board, I would just like to take a very brief moment to introduce to you Mr. Brian Lee, who is a relatively newly hired district engineer and deputy general manager. And since our general manager happens to be on leave right now, he's also the acting general manager, and we've been feeding him from a fire hose for about a month now. So please welcome him to our community. Thank you.
Yeah, one last comment. Thank you all for the high level of decorum and civility. I could almost feel the love permeating the room during the meeting today. Thank you. Go out and enjoy the sunshine. We are adjourned.